The Sunrise Morning Show continues, and as we mark the 23rd anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks, of course, those happened and culminated in Washington, D.C., at the Pentagon, at the World Trade Centers in New York City, and also in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Father Rob Jack is now with us. He's host of Driving Home the Faith on Sacred Heart Radio in Cincinnati, and sharing a little bit of memory of what happened that day. Father Rob, good morning.
Morning, man.
So, September 11th, 2001, where were you and what were you doing?
Well, it was, we were only 9 months into Sacred Heart Radio at the time. We were still operating out of a third-floor walk-up in Covington. And I was teaching at the seminary that day, and a strange thing, I was after morning mass, and I was looking on my computer, getting the news, and they said an airplane flew into the World Trade Center, where everyone thought it was like a little two-seater thing. And then it began to be clear, no, this was a jet airliner with passengers on board. And in this time, all of a sudden, there was a lot of unclarity, which time and I turned on the television, and you looked at the morning shows on the networks, and all of this was happening in live time. I mean, it was real time, seeing these things flying to the building. The people just shocked and unable to understand what. I mean, the first couple hours was just sheer shock, and people were tied to the television because many of them had sons and daughters and husbands and wives and moms and dads who worked in those two towers, and there was a large connection here to Cincinnati. And all this was beginning to go on, and no one really knew what was going on. And it must have been about 9:30, quarter to 10, I get a call from the Archdiocese. Dan Andriaco, who was the communications director at the time, he said, you're going to be getting a phone call in about 10 minutes from two different radio stations. They want you to do an on-air prayer that then they can tape and run for the rest of the day. I said, oh, Lord. So I had 10 minutes to come up with a prayer that's going to be run all throughout Cincinnati on at least two stations that I knew of. So I sat down and said, okay, Lord, you better give me a good one. And after about 7 minutes, I had something written down. And then I get a call from a WGRR in Cincinnati and said, and I was live on the air when I did that prayer. And then 7 minutes later, I get a call from WLW. And this is all when I was in my office at the seminary. And that was on the air. And that was also the day that we were doing our first fundraiser for Sacred Heart Radio. We had asked Matthew Kelly way back before he became, dynamic Catholic, to come to Mount St. Joe's and give a talk that day. And it was for us to fundraise and get the news out. And we didn't even know if we were going to be able to have that because, one, he wasn't in the area. He was flying in. And two, we didn't know what was going to be going on with the whole thing. Well, that night we had the thing, and the Mount St. Joe's meeting area was full. And we said that prayer that I put out. Then he gave his talk, and everyone then went home. But the thing is, most people remember that night. If you're on the west side of Cincinnati, September the 11th, it was so quiet because, as you know, Matt, the west side of Cincinnati is the landing zone for Greater Cincinnati Airport. And by 9, where it must have been about 11, 12 o'clock, the federal government shut down all the planes. They were all grounded. And the whole place just became this eerie silence. And no one quite knew what to do. And most of them, as I said, here is two secular radio stations. First thing they thought, let's turn to God. And so we put those prayers on the air. And then a lot of the television and other radio did the same thing. People were in shock, and so they turned to the Lord. That day reminds us of two things, the evil of human sin, but also how the power of God's grace can just smash that sin. And both were active. And when it was clear, and when the power of grace came down, we see it as the firemen and the policemen were going into those burning buildings. We saw it in priests who I was been able to meet, who were standing out there. And the police and the firemen would go to the priest. He would give them absolution, and then they would go into the burning buildings or help people come away. I mean, the heroism for the men and the women was just amazing, even simple citizens. And it set the stage for the next month or so. And it affected a couple in Cincinnati that I know well, Suzanne and Bob Peraza. They had a son, Robbie, who was killed in the second tower. And he was from St. Margaret of York Parish here in Cincinnati. And Suzanne was a nurse, Jewish, and Bob was involved with a lot of the Hispanic American things. And they went to New York City the next day. And all throughout the news, we saw the stories of parents and spouses putting up pictures, asking people, have you seen my son? Have you seen anything? And this began the whole period of, again, there was no division among the American people. There was no wokeism at this time. There was tremendous sorrow, but there was also a strong resolve and a strong faith. I can remember for the next month, you had to worry about finding a place at church because God, we turned to God. And this is something that we need to reclaim again. The 23 years, a whole generation, Matt, has gone away. They didn't know. And this is our chance. We must continue to tell people not only the evil that was done, but the great goodness. We are capable of doing that day, and we can do it again. And why aren't we doing it now, of looking out for each other? So it's a day that's etched in my memory. It's one of those generational things. Where were you, as you said? And it's something I hope many people will call to mind today and continue to share with others.
Yeah, and pray that we may be a light in all the darkness the world may seek to throw at us. Father Rob, thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Matt.